All right, so we'll jump into it. We're here to talk about this thing called critical controls, and I'm sure curious about who's on the line. Um, so potentially, a lot of you have a vast range of experience in this space, maybe in the critical risk space as well. Maybe some even more experience than I am, and I'm always keen to learn. So I'll talk about the structure and the format. So a few of you probably been on my webinars before. Um, if you can, just clear the decks. I'm going to go hard on content for about 40 minutes. So anything you do, not get distracted, flip your phone over, turn off your notifications, all of that. I'll do the same. So we can get into this. Okay, and I always make these things interactive. So first question, if a frontline worker came up to you and within your business said, hey, I've heard about this thing called critical control. What is it? What would be your one-line response, your simplified response that would help to articulate what you're trying to say, but in a simplified manner? So give everyone sort of 15 seconds, 20 seconds, throw something in the chat. What's a critical control, or how would you describe it to the frontline worker? And thank you, Cobus, as well. Mining industry, conductor critical international, including Northern Queensland. Thanks, Cobus. Jerry, what's going to save your life? Okay. What do some other people think? Thanks, Jerry, for going first. So we've got lots of people here. Just throw in there. All right. Framework to focus on James C. Thank you, James. Framework to focus on the important risk controls. Yep. What else we got? Nathan, a control that needs to be in place, which directly prevents unwanted events. Simon, things that provide the greatest protection, we can't afford to let them fail. Yep, so we're talking about their failures and what we want there. Jonathan, yep, got that one. Thank you. As we had a thing, the film in place to reduce the risk of an event occurring. Awesome. Anyone else have anything? Controls, Craig, controls that prevent, yeah, nice one, Craig. And Philip, controls that prevent life-changing events. And Evan as well. All right, so we can see some associations with consequence. Now here is a example from International Council of Mining Metals, which some of you may have heard of, ICMM. It's okay if you haven't. We're all talking around the same thing. Certainly there's an association with this thing that we don't want to happen, and this thing being of a big ticket item. And then, do we talk about if it was absent or failed and increase the risk? I think, Elsbieta, you sort of talked around that. And what's an example? Just so we're on the same page. Anyone want to share an example of critical control? Cobus, Pareto principle, 20% you need to reduce risk by 80%, broadly speaking. Thanks, Cobus. What's an example for someone's business around critical control that meets sort of this criteria and what people have been talking about? Anyone want to throw something in there? No right or wrongs. Skylight covers on roofs. Yep, Philip. Jonathan, crusher GET rock ejection cage. Yep, nice. Simon, storage tank, high level. Thank you. Evan, guarding around moving machinery. Nice. Some good juicy ones. Thank you for those. Anyone else throwing them in? That's cool. All right, so if we think about, CCM, critical control management, where are we as an industry, or maybe in your particular industry or your business? Is there a problem? If there's a problem, then how do we know that there's a problem? And certainly in the work that I do, time and time again, we're seeing confusion on critical controls, too many, not enough, a well-established system on paper, but no one on the front line knows it. So there's some examples that I'm seeing as pain points. You've probably seen some other ones, and maybe seen some bright spots as well. And what I'm going to do today is just talk through a few ideas, some tactical ideas that we believe that if they're in place, they are certainly a good fundamental in terms of helping us identify the right critical controls. So a few of you know me. For those that don't, about me in less than 15 seconds. So almost 25 years in high hazard industries. I'd say probably 80% of that is in mining. and for the last 7 years had my own business in Press Solutions, and we've been doing a lot of critical risk management projects for tier one miners, also oil and gas, also doing some stuff in utilities just now, in this space of critical risk management, critical control, single fatalities, multi-fatality risk, and other sort of safety services. So what I'll share today is both grounded in practical application, because we've done this in a lot of projects, with maybe a little bit of theory in there as well. A few of you have seen this one. So the push-ups picture there, when I'm thinking, the word comes out. So I'm keeping the recording, one, so we can have this as something that I can share with you post this, and then two, my daughter watches this and I have 5 push-ups each time. So I'm working on it. I've already used CCM as opposed to talking about critical control. So CCM, critical control management. We're going to move pretty quick, and there's going to be lots of time for interaction. And we've already started doing that in the chat. So the structure, going to cover off these 3 areas, these 3 ideas and 3 principles. At the end, there'll be time for Q&A, and I'm happy to stay on the line for as long as the last person's here after the end of the hour. And also, in a 40-minute block, can't cover everything around this topic. So I'll talk about what you can do to get some more information at the end as well, if you're interested in that. And I'll talk about how to get a copy of the slides and recording. Okay, so the first, I wouldn't say it's the first principle, but I feel like it's important to understand that there's a difference between critical risk management and critical control management, or identifying critical controls. And sometimes I've seen these terms used interchangeably, and even though the ICMM talks about critical control management as a framework. So what we're going to focus on today is really around this part here, which is around identifying critical controls. Okay. Just because you know how to do this, or your business is good at it, doesn't mean that equals a full critical risk management framework. So that's just a visual representation on the distinction between those 2 terms. Today isn't about going through the full framework. I do that in other workshops. We're just focusing here in this space. So I just want to make that clear to people. So we'll jump into the first idea here, which I'm sure a few of you have seen, maybe come across. How specific are these things called critical controls? So imagine if what you see here is some of your organization's critical controls. Looking at this list, can anyone see an issue or an opportunity for improvement with these controls? And when I'm asking this question, not necessarily thinking about the tactics, the risk it's related to, but more from a design of process perspective. What can you see? There might be some issues with these controls, certainly if we're calling them critical. Anyone got any ideas? Throw it in the chat if there's something you can see or something you can observe there. Simon, they're all systems and not specific to the hazard or threat. Yeah, potentially. There's some generic level things, or maybe they're a bit high. Yep. And that's sort of a segue to potentially another challenge here. What else can people see? Thanks also, Simon, for going first, mate. What some other people see as some challenges here? If this is your organization's list of critical controls, would you be happy with this? If not, why not? All right, Philip, not project specific. Thanks, Philip. Yep, and you've got that key word there about specific. Anyone else got something? Yeah, very broad and generic statements. Absolutely. So we wouldn't accept that. How would you verify that thing? Yeah, COBIT's management is not a control. Excellent. So we're all seeing, okay, these are probably a bit high level, a bit wishy-washy. And when we see these are some of the pain points or issues that we see in organizations. And maybe some of these are familiar. Like we talked about, broad and generic. We have aggregation or grouping, which sometimes they can have a time and place, and hopefully that's less the norm. Do the frontline workers even know what these things are? Or one for me, not even controls in and of themselves. So there's some pain points, and where we want to be, we want to be the other end of the scale. I'm just trying to move myself up the top there. It's not happening, so I'll move myself over there. So we want to have clarity. What are these things? Our verifications downstream loop back and are clear on what are the things that we're verifying, and our frontline workers are clear, which is this idea here, and probably not a surprise, are these critical controls even controls? So there's some terminologies here. Who's seen this before? Just a quick yes, no in the chat. So some vernacular here around describing a control. Seeing a few yeses. Okay, it's okay if you haven't, but that's good. So which helps us to provide a framework to get targeted on what is really a control. So first of all, an act is a human action. If you think about act-object systems, act is a human action. Object is something that it doesn't require a human to do to perform as a control. And a system is a combination. So an example of a system could be something like a seatbelt, where we've got a human action to put it on, and then we have the reel and the strap and all of that sort of stuff. And then also some of these other aspects here, people talked about. What does it do in relation to the unwanted event? It's not just something; it has a purpose. Specific, measurable, and auditable as well. We saw what good does not look like with broad statements, and this is a big one for me. Is it's not an orphan control, so it's not just something that we say we do, but I can't find in the management system that says yes, we do this, and this is who needs to do it, and this is what it looks like. So, quick test around the ground. So everyone on the line, would your current list of critical controls meet all of this criteria? Would they pass these tests? Just a quick yes, no. Gut feel. So what do we got? 18 people here. Simon, no. Belinda, only some. James, no. Joanne, no. Jerry, partly. Elzbieta, not all of them. Craig, no. Cobus, NA. Yep, because you're different perspective. Who else have we got? Who have we missed? Probably got a few others on here. Nathan, no. Philip, partially. Jen, no. All right. Anyone else before we keep moving? Evan, yes and no. Okay. You might be the same as Philip on partially. All right. So even before we move forwards, there's an opportunity there, isn't there? If it doesn't meet this first layer of definition, then that's probably something that we need to look at, or could look like, or I'd be suggesting that's where you start, even before we start getting into critical controls. Then there's this next framework or model, which a few of you have probably seen, is, okay, just because it might meet the definition of a control, like we just talked about previously, or maybe it doesn't, we need to make sure it's not a support activity or a verification activity. So a support activity, they are things that we do that maximize the health of a control or maximize the health of a critical control, but of themselves are not a control. So looking on the left-hand side there, can anyone see what might be an example of a support activity? Anyone want to throw something in the chat? So support activity, they're things that we do that maximize a true control or a direct control. We've got Belinda, hazard reporting, Nathan, induction, Elzbieta, monthly surveys. Well, that could fall into one or two. Could fall in that one. And then the other category here is verification activity. So verification activities, they're things that we do that check on the health of a control, but of themselves are not a control. So maybe, Evan, potentially we could class inspections as a verification activity. Yeah, Belinda, classic one, stat inspections. How much do we rely on that? Inspections, OC inspections. So audits, reviews, all of those things can fall into verification activities, support activities, maintenance, education, training, signs, safety and health management system, documentation, all of those things. So we're starting to see at least two tests we can deploy. And I'll talk about an example here. So we work with an organisation, this is probably almost 2 years ago, and this is an example of their Bowtie for one of their major unwanted events. Doesn't matter if you can't see the detail. And at first pass, this bow tie looks pretty good, doesn't it? And maybe the right-hand side needs a little bit of work, but the left-hand side, not too bad. Certainly, we've got lots of controls. So we applied just those simple tests, those quality assurance tests to, is it act, object, system, specific, measurement, auditable, tied into the management system, and then also checking it's not a support activity and monitoring activity. What do you think we found when we applied the framework to this bow tie? Anyone want to guess what we saw or what the result was? Took those rules, deployed it against the bow ties. What do you think we found when we looked at the controls in the bow tie? Philip, most were support and monitoring. Linda found a lot not critical. Yep, huge ability to simplify. Simon, yep, you guys are all on the right money. There are a lot of support activities. Yeah, so rough numbers, probably about a 40% reduction in things that pass the test. Yep, Cobus, you're on the money. Yeah, 40% reduction just by applying these simple tests. So obviously, think about their suite of bow ties. If 40% of reduction, fair bit of nervousness within the business as a result of that. And then we undertook a program to deploy these things, work out what are true controls, did the work, and they've ended up in a better place than where they were previously. And obviously there's, I can get off my soapbox, but I'll ask this question. Okay, round the grounds. Craig, yep, you're on it. How would you rate your organisation's definition or ability to pass the critical controls to pass all those tests? So out of 10, 10 is you're awesome. There's no more work to be done. 1 is nowhere near. Jerry's a 3, Nathan's an 8 out of 10. Okay. Linda 8, Simon 5, Joanne 5, Evan 9. That's pretty good. Marin 6, Phillips 4. Who else? Who else we had at a 4? Thank you. Who else we got there? Probably a few other people on the line. Do we hear from Simon and Joanne? Yes, we did get from Joanne. Okay, so reflective moment. So what have we talked about there? We talked about the impacts if our critical controls aren't true controls, what that can lead from. We've talked about some frameworks that we can deploy to help us get to a point on, well, what is a true control that we can then choose from as part of that. And we talked about, an example there, a case study, 40% reduction. And I wonder within your own businesses, could that be the similar scenario or the similar setup? And then the opportunity, obviously moving forwards, is what are you going to do about it? It's not that hard to deploy these frameworks. So rounding this out, yep, if those critical controls at least meet the definition, that's the building block. You've got to start there to help us get to what are the right critical controls. Okay, next idea. How do we choose the chosen few? All right, quick yes, no. If I walked into your business today, is there some framework that I could deploy that lets me apply and I can follow what someone else might have followed to come up with the same potential list of critical controls? Yes, no. Do you have a repeatable process, objective repeatable process? Bell, you're a yes. Evan's a 3. Craig's a no. Jerry, it's there but obscure, so no. James, a no. Elzbieta, a no. Anyone else? Simon, sort of. Okay. Maybe we can interpret that as a no, depending what is there, what's not. And so, without trying to be humorous, but sometimes we need to, otherwise you cry. Imagine if this was your organisation's process for selecting critical controls. And I'm sure some of us have seen this has been a process there. I'll come in and say, okay, there are your list of critical controls. Let's go back in time. How did you get to this list? Where did these come from? And sometimes it's just shrug shoulders, which can be pretty frustrating because we do a lot of work based on these things we can't justify where they came from. No worries, Evan. This is being recorded, mate. So yeah, thanks for jumping on anyway whilst you can. And so in these scenarios, you might find a lot of these. There's disagreement, or there is no process. We've got too many. Some of those very similar pain points there, or we've got low adequacy. And again, we want to be in a position it's clear, objective, they're endorsed, and certainly the less is more one, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the third principle. So, what are some for those that do have some a process, or even if you don't, what do you think if you had all of these, let's say 100 controls, and you were trying to work out what of these are critical? What would be some tests that you would deploy, or some questions, or some elements that the control would need to meet? Has anyone got any ideas? You want to throw something in the chat there? What are some tests that we can do to help us work out if this thing can go from a control to being eligible as a critical control? What does some people know or have used in the past or are currently using that helps with that? Hopefully there's something. Otherwise, we're back in. Simon, level of risk increase wasn't there. Nice one. Cobus, the flowchart from the ICMM. Yes. Bell, field test. Yes. Craig, the flowchart you showed before. Yep. Now I'm about to show another one. That's not bad. Anyone else got any things? Evan, does the control prevent instigation of the event occurring? Yes. Jerry, the life impact. Yep. So is it against a big ticket thing? Yeah, some pretty good ones there. Okay, and so there's some words on paper here, and I know the wording is changing, and there's certainly some involved thinking. So we know first of all it must meet the definition of control. We just talked about that. Secondly, there could be some tests there, which have come from an ACAR paper, which are pretty good actually, not too bad. And a few people might talk about it. We talked about if it was absent or failed, would there be a significant increase? That could be one. So to visually represent what this might be. So this is, for example, I'm just going to move myself across the criticality test. So if I took these controls here, which one is more critical or more essential? And maybe this business said autonomous braking is more essential than the others, as an example. The singularity, I call it the singularity test. But what if it's the only control on a pathway, and this might be a high likelihood pathway? So that could be a consideration there if it's the only thing we've got in place. The absence failure, well, we talked about. So if autonomous braking failed here, is there a higher likelihood that we might, the energy might continue through to the loss of control event? And occurrence. So just how prevalent is the reliance on this control within a bow tie, or per risk, or sometimes across multiple risks? So, for example, things in relation to emergency response capability, generally we'll find them across multiple bow ties or multiple risks, often on the right-hand side, obviously, and therefore, due to its regular occurrence and prevalence, it falls into the category of being eligible for critical control selection. And then there's an example flow chart. So this is, I know a few of you that are in the school community, I've shared this before, looking at the latest ICMM standard, a selection process, a pathway that could be used. You'll have this in the slide pack. I'm not going to dissect this too much, except to say over here, we've already talked about it's got to pass the tests of being a control and not a support activity or a verification activity. Then here, and this is my personal opinion and what we subscribe to, that we do every control, there's an effectiveness test performed on it, because we know not all controls are effective as another one. And that if we know the effectiveness of the control, then potentially we can set a threshold of control effectiveness. So if it's beyond this, let's say if it's highly adequate or very good adequacy based on our effectiveness assessment, then we can then consider that for critical control selection. Then we've got the things associated with an MUE, the absence failure aspect like we talked about, And then there's some extra words here, which are some new language in the ICMM guide, which I like, or the draft guide. Here about its reliability. Can we rely on it consistently to function? And that's an interesting one. So an example I can give there is, let's say we have our big, even if you're not in mining, you probably know the big haul trucks, the big trucks that drive around a site. And one of the key controls there, one of the key controls a lot of what organizations have is fire suppression. So if this thing catches on fire, then there's automated fire suppression that kicks in and dampens the fire. So there have been instances, turn that off, sorry. There have been instances in organizations where they've got this control in place, but it's not across the whole fleet. So what does that mean in terms of reliability and availability? It's a good control where it's fitted, but if it's not there at all, then is that a consistent application? So there's some interesting tests there. I like this language. And then there's some, I guess in the new framework, you can either come through the blue and then just go over here. And I keep calling it, I say eligible for critical control selection, as opposed to just default, it is a critical control. We'll talk about that later. And thanks, Avika. There's some good tests as well. I like that. Thanks, mate. And then here we're starting to add in, the independence, like I talked about, about that. This one here, which is, we've seen some language, and if you've read Simon Halliwell's book about the human error component, can this critical control withstand a human error? So whatever the common errors might be, can it still function as we intend it to do and withstand that? And that's an interesting test. And to be fair, I haven't deployed that a lot yet. That's an opportunity, certainly for me, to start doing some more work in that space. So there's some example frameworks. Again, so the 300, what's that all about? So we work with a client. They had 300 critical controls. It was a mining client. You can imagine the work that gets created when they had 300 critical controls. It was out of control. They were overwhelmed. Where do we start? What do we do? And all we did, again, we just took their list, moved them back through the framework about, first of all, is it a control in and of itself? And then, control, support activities, monitoring activities, and then effectiveness rating, and a few other of these tests. And we're able to pretty much come out at half, 150 as opposed to the 300. We didn't lose. So sometimes these critical controls, we don't lose them from the business. We just don't class them as critical. Because when we class them as critical, there's a whole host of downstream works. We just class them as non-critical. The control's still there. We just don't do all this extra stuff that we would for a critical control. So we deployed that process, didn't introduce any risk. And obviously they were pretty happy that we could apply an objective process to get to there. Okay, so ratings out of 10. Where do we sit in relation to an objective repeatable process to select critical controls for your business? We've talked about some frameworks that can be deployed and some considerations. Who wants to go first? Let's go around the grounds. Got a few people here. What is people's ratings? Bell, thanks for going first again. 6, Nathan 5, Simon 5, Evans a 9. Well, that's pretty good. Jerry's a 4. Craig, you're an R5. I don't know if that's a special type of 5, but that's cool. What else do people have? Simon, Philip, Joanne, Jen, Philip's a 4. Elzbieta a 3. Okay. Who else haven't we heard from yet? Okay. Avi's a 3. Oh, thanks, Avi, for coming on too. I know you came in a little bit later. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for voting in there. All right, so rounding this out, we've talked about now, we don't want to have a rabbit out of the hat process because we know it just leads to a cluster of things. So we want to have an objective, repeatable process. We've talked about an example of one, and we've had some good conversations about what could be some other considerations. And we talked through an example where our client, we pretty much 50% reduction in their critical controls just by applying these frameworks. You can deploy it without, in my view, introducing any additional risks. So now it's again up to you if you want to choose to do things the old way, carry on, or maybe deploy a new process, a revised, maybe it's an enhanced process. So what we know is applying a robust selection process, it's a key one there. I've done too many projects where we've done it and it's worked well. And the last idea, or the third idea, I won't say the last, but the third idea for today anyway, is around right sizing the number of critical controls. And I've seen all range of spectrum here. So what do people think? How many critical controls should you have? Any ideas, insights? Anyone have a perspective on this? Avi, 2 to 4. Okay. Evan, for each MU, we allow 2 to 5 only. Okay. Aaron, at most 5. You might have said in another one we did, Aaron. Thanks, mate. Jerry, no more than 10. Okay. Artie, around 10% of the total number of controls. Oh, that's an interesting one. Never thought about percentage before. Thanks, mate. That's an interesting one. Philip, enough to mitigate the risk, but not too many to cloud the issue. Thank you. Anyone else got an idea or a perspective on this? Bell, as many as needed to ensure stop a fatality. Yes. And Elsbieta, depends on risk. It depends on the risk profile. Yeah. There's certainly an element of depends as well. Deliberately very subjective question. Depends. What are some of the considerations? What we've talked about. So some considerations here, like we talked about. Thanks, Vika. As many as you need to demonstrate the risk has been reduced to, safe up. So we talked about some consideration, nature of the risk, the context of the business, again, the financials of the business, the resource of the business, the nature of the risk. There's a whole host of things, the maturity, where they are in their journey. So some elements there. And I want to talk about what might be some things that we can do if we think we have too many. Thanks, Avika. So look, my subjective practical-based guidance that I give to organizations, which is not based on science, is maximum of 5. Most of my clients have, let's say, in the order of 30 critical risks. So already that's about 150 critical controls, which is a lot. If I was doing some work, for a small manufacturing business that lived in a local town and did, is that per MUE? Yeah, 5 per MUE is my rough guidance. If it was a smaller business, I'd be saying maybe choose 1. Like there was a manufacturing plant type business that they just fabricate steel in one of the mining places. They didn't have lots of critical risks, let's say 4 or 5, but they were right at the start of the journey. And I said, look, just choose 1 because I hadn't done the full framework. So there's so many perspectives on that. So let's say we're in a scenario where we might have too many, again, that's whatever the context might be, but what might be some things we could do to rationalise or get it to a point where we think it might be manageable for our business? So one strategy is to go back through the flowchart again. Do they meet all of the tests? Where there's some that we thought, maybe borderline, maybe it's a kind of a yes, kind of no, maybe that might be a natural way that we could filter out to get back to an area. An area that not a lot of organizations do, or less mature, is contextualizing each of these MUEs or each of these critical risks. So it's one thing to say, okay, here's a list of my 30. Have we contextualized it for our business? So what does working at heights mean for my business? Not just generic working at heights. What are the scenarios? What are the types of activities? What's the magnitude of the energy? All of that sort of stuff we contextualize. So once we start to compare our list of critical risks, does it depend on the nature of the risk? So for example, here, if we had, light vehicle collisions, let's say traffic movements on a mine site, or that's a pretty big risk. That's a high likelihood exposure. high consequence outcome compared to a snake bite. If they had listening to snake bites on their list, they might look at that and say, well, you know what, for snake bites, we don't need to have 5 critical controls. We might just choose 1 or 2. Compared to mobile equipment, we might have 5, we might have 6 or 7. So we can kind of balance it out across the risk profile to average out 5, as an example. Even though we talked about controls need to be specific, measurable, and auditable related to the risk, sometimes consolidation and grouping can add some efficiency gains, and we're willing to sort of lose some specificality. I'm doing some work with a global miner at the moment, and in order for them to agree on a global critical control for a few of their different common critical risks, they're taking an aggregation approach. And certainly with that aggregation, there's some things they can do in performance standards to still specify, but that can have a place too. Vika, the only industry I've seen more than 3 controls, bearings, rail, aviation, nuclear, process safety, I've played struggle to get more than 3 and mining struggle to get 2. Yeah, thanks, mate. Thank you for those insights. And certainly if you're at the start of the journey, get 1 and get it right before you move on to more. Also, there's an element here around likelihood pathways. So depending on the health of our bow ties, we know all of the causes. This is about bow tie. All of the causes and also all of the consequences may have differing levels of likelihood. And we might then target our critical controls to higher likelihood pathways because we have data that tells us that, or we have some type of evidence, as opposed to lower likelihood pathways. So some things we can do there as well. Cobus, in my experience, you stand back and get the person doing knowledge about work and ask them to pick their most. Yeah, thanks, Cobus. That's a nice share. And also, we can do, I wouldn't call it horse trading, but it's like we might say, look, this one I'm willing to downgrade as critical control, which means I'm not going to do the full range of assurance activities, but it doesn't mean we can't still retain some type of assurance. We might set up a 3-monthly or a 6-monthly thing. We're not going to call it a whole critical control verification, but we're still going to have some type of insurance because we still want to keep our eye on that. So we can sort of get that middle ground as well. Okay, so what do we think now for our organisation in terms of right-sized approach to number of critical controls? So we've had some conversations about, well, potentially how many. We've talked about designing the numbers based on the context of the business and the context of the risk. And we talked about some tools that we can deploy to help us right-size the numbers of critical control. Bill, 9 out of 10, that's good. Awesome. What do some other people have here as ratings? Jerry, oversized. That's honest, thanks, mate. Simon's a 3. What else? Who else has got some stuff? Nathan's a 7, Evan's a 9. That's pretty good. Evan, you've been running pretty hot, mate. That's good. Abby's a 3. Craig's a 4. Phil's a 5. Joe's a 6. Artie's a 4. Elzbieta also far too many. 4. Cool. Well, hopefully some of those frameworks can use. Look, I won't ask a reflective question. We get the picture. Too many, boil the ocean. Vika's already shared. You just can't keep up. Create a rod for your own back. And there's a lot of projects we're doing where a lot of companies are trying to downsize. So be pragmatic at the start. We know that's essential to getting the right critical controls as well. Okay, I've talked a lot. Now time for people to share. In the chat, what's been your aha moment or a key idea or a key takeaway? Because there's been lots of things that we've talked about. What's a one thing? Give everyone 30 seconds to throw something in the chat, and I'm going to cross-reference this with who's on the line, because hopefully everyone. Jerry, transport is a long way behind other industries. Yeah, cool. Bell, can a control survive human error? Yeah, that's certainly been a useful one for me more recently as well. Evan, the question posed, can the control withstand human error? Cool. Thanks, Evan. Craig, some of the new gate questions to help narrow the CC number. Nice. Jen, some work to do in our organisation review existing critical controls. Okay, well, hopefully this helped.
Phil, volume controls don't always equal effective. That's a good one, mate. That could be a slogan we could deploy across industry. You could have a chat with Linfo. Yeah, nice. Thanks for doing that. What do some other people have? Who hasn't said, Nathan, do controls allow the work to fail safely? Yeah, that's an interesting one. I've toyed around with that idea and I feel like there's some area to explore in that space. Thanks, mate. Who else? Anyone else we haven't heard from yet? Um, okay, well, I'll keep going forward so we make it on time. Jonathan, concept of aggregation, ensuring a routine fit for purpose approach to your own cross pit to port supply chain. Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. And certainly it starts to get interesting if the nature of your business is so different um, across different areas where you have these key risks. Won't do that one. Okay. Thank you for those that are sharing. All right. So clearly, we've all shown up today because we know that there's opportunities in critical controls, identification, management, all of that sort of stuff. So wrapping out some of our key points, we know we first of all talked about it's got to meet the basic definitions, and that's a starting point straight away. I can't remember, maybe it was Jen. Um, Let me just Cobus, in my experience, 6 years in mining, have gone from too many to too little, now starting to settle. This is also documented. Yeah, nice. Thanks, Cobus. All right, so we know it's got to meet the definitions straight away. If it hasn't, that's the starting point. Getting a good selection process, and again, they're always subjective. Again, but they give us a better chance of success than having nothing in place. And we're seeing there's an evolution in some of the tests that we can deploy. The human error one, I think, is a really useful addition. And right sizing as well the numbers of critical controls. So I think that's a useful. Well, all of those three, if you could deploy that, I think certainly moves you forward. So how do I do it? Look, again, like everything I always say in these webinars, you can do it the slow way or the fast way is the trial and error. You know, I've been doing this for a fair while now. I think some people online maybe a little bit longer than I am, and I'm always learning. So you can do it where you can deploy it those ways, or I mentioned what you can do if you want some further help or further assistance. And so certainly one of the things we're doing, only the people that join our webinars, is we've got a critical risk platform that we've got some clients using already, and it pretty much does all of this with some human toll gates. And I'll talk about what it looks like. So for those on the line, yeah, certainly offering up an opportunity to give you a quick 2-week trial just to see what it can look like. You could take a risk and just work it through end to end. But certainly it's not for you. If you've already got a software program, you think your organization's process is all good, then don't worry about it. But for those you're like, oh, I'd be interested to try something else, sanity check. We can use our data to see where we end up. And certainly a lot of our clients now use it as a cross-reference tool. No worries, Vika. I'll see you around, mate. So this is an example of what it can do. It's AI-driven. You suck up your data, tell it the industry, click a few buttons, and what used to take us, gosh, probably 30 hours to come up with, it can now do it in about 5 minutes. Now, we actually do a webinar, we do a live trial on that. So it can do that and then take you into the performance standards as well for each critical control, design the performance standards. I think it's pretty good. It's been really helpful for me. So that's certainly an opportunity. Why am I doing this? Ultimately, I'm trying to do things at scale. I'm only one person, so I put all of my IP into this platform to then hopefully we can all standardize, even just being able to bring in industry databases and we can all learn from that. For whatever reason, we don't do that. So look, if you're interested, just say yes in the chat now and we'll get you some detail, but it's just a 3-step process. Fill out the form, you get the login details and you're away. It's good functionality, be a little bit limited. It's not the full box and dice, but it's enough that you can take one unwanted event, upload your information, give it the industry context, and you can follow it all the way through to the end where you have performance standards ready to go. So, all right, thanks, Belle, Jen, Jerry, Evan, Cobus. All right, you can keep applying that while I keep moving forwards. Yeah, again, I've mentioned you take all of that 30 years of history. It's in the box ready to go, industry info.
You don't have to pay money, and you save yourself time. And also some low-hanging fruit. So it's also useful to help as a cross-reference when you bring in industry information against your own. You can see what the gaps are and what might be something you could bring into your own business, or you might choose not to. Okay, so that's it. That's all I wanted to go through. We now have time for general questions. I think I did even put the link to that application form in the chat right at the start before people jumped on the line. I'm going to just drop it in now. But if anyone has a burning question right now, I'll put that link to the form. Yeah, I've just put it in the chat now. Fire away. Maybe because we don't have lots of people, you are quite welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question for all of us. No worries, Craig. No worries, Simon. Anyone have a question or a comment? You can either unmute, share, or you can throw it in the chat.
All good. Thanks, Christian.
No worries. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone unmuted. Jerry Bell, you going to say something?
No, thank you.
Oh, too easy, Jerry. Belinda, I can see you're unmuted. Yeah, I can't hear you, mate. I can see you're unmuted though. That's weird. If you want, throw it in the chat, and I'll have a look at Elsbietta's question here, which is a good one. Any advice how to push back on global teams who push generic bow ties and controls down on the? Oh my goodness. Gee, that's a really good question. Any advice on global teams that push back on generic bow ties and controls down operations? Yeah, this is a really hard one because this isn't even so much about the technical, is it? It's more around the design of the organization, the understanding of decision makers, and ultimately who can make the call at the highest level on the design of these things. So, I mean, what I have seen is I've seen the ground up approach. So let's say, because we know, for example, in the mining context, a mining manager or a site senior executive or someone locally that has some pull within the organization might say, look, I'm going to engage this external party, or we locally have done this. We've done a cross-reference because we've seen some new information. I'm a local decision maker and I feel exposed. So I've engaged this review, and what I've seen is X, Y, Z. So use that local site-derived insight to say, well, hang on, do we have a problem? If we've got a problem here at one site, could these problems be at more than one site? So I've seen that done. Not too bad. We have sort of, and again, it depends. Again, sorry, I could go on because also it depends on the personalities involved. I actually have seen in a large mining house, the peoples that were the governors of this system weren't experienced safety and risk people, and it was just a blank wall. I would then, so if you can't do anything there, I would then explore an exceptions process, whether your organization has an exceptions process for saying, okay, these are the generic ones come through. We're going to go the exceptions play and say, we believe these aren't applicable, these are more applicable, or we're going to say, can we have these exception, or we've done a mapping activity where we can see how these generic ones map to my local specific ones. So I'm going to keep doing my local specific ones, and here's how they map back so I can meet my assurance things. That's too off the cuff, mate. I don't know if that helps. We could probably kick that around a little bit further if you wanted to. Yeah, thanks, Evan, as well. Controls push down and don't pass. Yeah, no worries, mate. Again, just we can talk offline around that. All right, Cobus, are you going to say something?
No, I just unmuted because you said we should.
Oh, okay. I was saying, yeah, unmute if you wanted to talk. If anyone's got a question.
Yeah, this on the generic bow ties, I've seen in the big organizations I've done, the reason for that generic one was exactly as you guys said. It's sort of the guys at some sites miss them, and at other sites, and then again, I think that last controls for each site is specific, but you have to address it and give you give quantifiable reasons why it's not applicable at your site. And in that way, you can say it's not part of my site, but it's more aimed at not missing any of the unwanted events and the causes and the medical controls and preventative controls. So I think that's the thinking behind it. But yeah, I think for different companies will manage it differently.
Yeah, and thanks, mate. And then on the other side of the scale, I think in those global companies, I feel like they have a time and place provided they pass these tests, because then they give that minimum standard for the risk, the controls, and the critical controls. Again, if they pass the tests, and then locally sites can add on top. Belle, you're still unmuted. Did you want to add something else? No, and if you're talking, mate, can't hear you, so something funky going on. All right, so I will proceed to finish up, but I'm happy to stay on the line. So yes, for those that have joined, yes, this recording, okay, got it, Belle, thanks. This recording, we'll top and tail and get it ready, the slide pack as well, so you'll have access to this downstream. Also, yeah, if you wanted to have a crack at that trial, the link is in the chat. It'll also be in the pack that gets sent out at a later point in time. I recommend get in there and have a crack. It's blown my mind what it can do. Everyone knows where to find me. So that's it. So thank you for those. If you need to go, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thanks for your interaction. Hopefully for those who got up early in the morning, or for those that got told to come here because it adds value, hopefully it did. I'll stay on the line until the last person goes, so I'm happy to talk and chat wherever it needs to go. So thank you, those who are going. Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks, Joanne.